Okay, we're live. Hi, everyone. Here's my top tip for you, my first tip for the day. If you're going to do a talk here, don't go to see Josh Long and Victor beforehand, because it sets the bar really high. I've been watching to see the scores there. Very good, very impressive. Anyway, I shall do my best. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. You'll learn one or two things. I'm sure some of the things I'm going to talk about you'll know about, and that's fine. But maybe if there's one new little thing, then I'll be happy with that. And if not, well, you can enjoy the clip art. You can enjoy the things. So guess who got themselves a Dali subscription? Okay, so there's a little story about a project that I was working on, an upgrade project, which is, maybe not the most glamorous of things, but we all have to do it. I guess you're in the room, and so perhaps you're in the same situation, or you're about to, or you've done it in the past. You need a bit of therapy or something. So let me get into the story, and we've got one or two demos along the way. So a little bit of background. I work as an independent consultant at a place in the Netherlands called Euro Commercial Properties. Quite a young company, really, about 30 years old. They own and operate shopping centres across Europe, as you can see. And not a small company, not a big company, in the middle, so turnover of 250 million, 4 billion assets when I went looking at the financial reports there. So quite a lean company. I don't know how many employees there are, 100, but not even 200, I think. So, it gets a lot of stuff done with quite a small team, and you'll see an echo of that as when we come to the IT type of stuff. And so the system that I work on is called Astachio. It's an in-house ERP, I suppose you'd say. It's a back office system primarily. It's used by the administrators and the workers there in the various different offices across Europe. So the type of stuff it does, I'm not here to tell you about Astachio per se, just to kind of give you a bit of context. So the first stuff we implemented was sort of invoice generation, outgoing invoices, and later on we added some functionality to manage the approval process and handling of incoming invoices, payments and so forth. You'll notice the word shared kernel there, which if you're a DDD, domain-driven design kind of guy, it's very much a DDD type of application. So the shared kernel is the stuff that's kind of common to both the outgoing processing and the incoming processing. So fixed assets, that would be to say the shopping centres and the units within, the parties, the tenants, the landlords and the suppliers and so forth, and other kind of reference data as well. And then there's some stuff that kind of goes across both the outgoing and the incoming, for example, service charges. So if you're a tenant at one of our shopping centres, there will be a charge that we get as the landlord for cleaning your unit, and we pass some of that on. So that kind of ties these two sides together. So it's an ERP, a back office system, and I'm sure some of you have worked on similar types of systems. I just pulled some stats. So it's been running since 2014 when it went live. It's 10 years old now. First couple of years was sort of doing the initial development. You can see at the point which we did outgoing invoices by different countries, and then we rolled it out to France, having started in Italy, and then we brought in the incoming invoices, and so on it goes. If you're wondering what happened in 2024, I did a version of this talk earlier in the year in May, so that was the numbers back in May. I suppose it's on schedule. Okay, a few pictures. It's a back office system. I obviously have to grey out some of the stuff there for confidentiality, but that is a representation of a lease, and you can see data, you can see collections, you can see buttons which are actions, behavior and so forth. It's a DDD application. It's a complicated domain, so it's not a CRUD application. All the behavior there does significant stuff. So that's an example of that. Here's another picture image, which is of a representation of one of our shopping centres. I'm not going to go into the detail. It's not really important for the purpose, just to sort of give you a feel for the place we're working at. And then from a developer perspective, so it's a lean organisation, a lean team. The application, as I say, has been developed since 2012. Between 2 and 5 developers, some of whom are part-time. I'm part-time, I'm there about half my time. There's a culture of actually having students coming in from usually the Amsterdam technical universities, and they, for the old-timers like me with a bit of grey hair, they kind of keep us on our toes, and it's enjoyable to have them there. So it's a small team, but you can see the application is fairly substantial in terms of its size. As I say, it's 12 years old now. It does a lot of stuff. It is the core ERP for the company, really. There's a financial system as well, and that's about it, really, in terms of operating the company. And we do testing. You'd expect us to, wouldn't you? Okay, anyway, to get on to the migration then, so let me explain what we needed to do for this upgrade. I call the title Changing the Gearbox. So what is the gearbox that was being changed? This application runs on top of a framework, and the framework that it used to run upon is called Apache ISIS, which is an implementation of the naked objects pattern. If you've not come across that as a name, think of it like an ORM, but it automatically generates the user interface for free, which is why we can go quick, because you focus on the domain, use an ORM to do the back-end persistence, and then this framework here does the front-end stuff. That's why we can build a big system with not many people and focus on the DDD type of stuff. So Apache ISIS is quite an old piece of framework, and the changes to its successor, which is, we changed the name as well. The joke here is Apache ISIS and naked objects. We have a history of unfortunate names, so we changed the name to Causeway. We like the name Causeway. It sort of is the notion of bridging from the business to the technical folk, to kind of create that linkage there. Also, if you know DDD and hexagonal architecture, you might know that in Northern Ireland, there's a giant's causeway. You've not seen that. It's an archaeological feature, and it has hexagonal things. So we like the word causeway. Anyway, so Causeway is the successor to ISIS. The most significant thing is that ISIS is an old code base. Causeway sits on top of Spring Boot. So basically we spent, I think it was about 4 or 5 years, refactoring ISIS as a framework, renaming it Causeway along the way, and having it sit on top of Spring Boot. So that was like a migration of the framework. And then Astachio is running on top of, the old version was running on top of ISIS, and the new version is running on top of Causeway. So this was the gearbox that we were basically looking to change. And an important thing really, from my point of view as an independent consultant, I have my client, you're a commercial, and we have a long relationship, it works very well, but what happens, this is a small, I'm passionate about this framework, but it's a small framework, and we have a small community, so in terms of making sure that my client is future protected, being able to run on top of Spring Boot on top of a framework, it's their core domain, was an important motivator really, to kind of take to de-risk this thing, so that worst comes to worst. I hope this will never happen, but at the end of the day, they've got an application that runs on Spring Boot, and then the stuff that the framework does in the middle, you could always write that by hand if you really wanted to, with a bunch of controllers and HTML and DTOs and all that kind of nonsense. I just remembered I'm being recorded and live subtitles as well. Anyway, so that's the gearbox that we're changing, so that's fine. But we've got to keep driving, we have to keep delivering the business value. With such a small team, it's really important. Actually, the business didn't know we were doing this. This is how much we kept this under the radar, really. So there are some bullet points about stuff we were doing over the 2 years that we did this migration. The stuff in blue is kind of businessy stuff, and the stuff underneath is some technical stuff, including lifting and shifting and moving all this stuff up into one of the clouds. So I'm not going to explain these things, it's not important, but this is very much the motivator. We couldn't just stop and do the necessary work. We had to find a way to keep delivering business value. There's always new requirements coming up. Small team couldn't just stop. So that was the sort of the motivation. And then I did a little bit of querying, and so we did succeed. That's the number of deployments that we do. It's definitely a build it, you run it type of place. So we do the whole deployment into production, so we have a mechanism for that. And you can see that across the numbers, actually, if anything, they went up a bit as we're adding in new functionality. Okay, so that's the context. Let's get on to some of the tricks and so forth. So we use Maven, and Maven profiles is one of the ideas. So you'll know what profiles are, I would imagine, by which we want to effectively have 2 different variants of the same POM file, whereby with one profile enabled, we get one set of plugins and dependencies and stuff. In other words, all the old Apache ISIS things. And then with the new profile, we're bringing in the new dependencies as well. Remember that Causeway is run on top of Spring Boot, so there's quite a lot of re-engineering going on here. So we defined profiles. Lots of different ways you can activate profiles in Maven. We did some experimentation. For us, what worked the best and most reliably was using this the presence or the existence of a marker file. So we wrote a little script that effectively spins through, finds the pom.xml files, because it's a modular monolith. There's lots of pom files, in fact. Plop a v2.marker file, and wherever that is, that if that's present, then effectively we're into the v2 kind of thing. Okay, so you can imagine I've checked out my code from Git repo. If I want to do some v2 work, I run that script, and then I load that up into my IDE, and effectively I'm sort of seeing what I can see from a v2 perspective. All right, so that makes sense. So then this is sort of a picture of one of the modules. We'll come on to modularity later on, but I'll just take a bit of time just to explain the core idea here. So we start off with effectively nothing migrated. We want to basically make sure that the code is compatible with both the old framework and with the new framework. Okay. So the idea was we will have a profile. I don't think you can actually see this, but so that's source main Java, and that's in blue. If you're in IntelliJ, that means that's part of the class path. And then here you can see source main Java v1. So these two roots basically are kind of part of the class path. And then Java v2, you can see that's not got blue. So this is me looking at my code base from a v1 perspective, and the same here with the test as well. So the idea was to effectively, if I want to start migrating this module, the agreement module, I would start off on day one moving all of the code from source main Java into source main Java v1. So that if I looked at this from the perspective of v2, there was no code, basically. The only code you'd see would be this thing here, which is a Spring Boot configuration, right, a definition of a module. So that's fine. My code, this module compiles into v2, but there's no code there. And then effectively, the idea was to say, we go through all of the code that's currently in source main Java v1, and then move it back to source main Java, which means that if I look at this from the v2 perspective, then it's there, and I have to make sure it works. So the idea was, steadily work our way through all the modules, and there's a lot of them. More on that later. And effectively, we know we've won when all of the code has landed back in source main Java, right? And the Java v1 is the old way of bootstrapping the application, and this Java v2 is the new way. It's just kind of the Spring configurations, but that's all that's there. It's just the wiring, but the actual business logic is under source main Java. And the same, of course, is true with the tests as well. So that was the plan, to kind of work our way through the different modules and to do that, making adjustments as we need to. So that's what we did, in fact. That worked nicely. Oh, Dali, bless its little, having to write the name of the plugin there. So the thing that makes source main Java v1, they part of your path is this build helper plugin. So this is effectively the block of XML you need to add. So this would be in one of either the v1 or the v2 profiles. So this is a snippet, I suppose, from v1. You can see that here we have the stuff to say, make source main Java and source main Java v1 source directories, and over here make them part of the test as well. So this would have appeared in the v1 profile, and there'll be a similar block of code that will be there in the v2 profile. Okay, so that works nicely. Right, now then, what's this about? Okay, so yes, so supposing I've checked out my code, and I'm in v1 and I compile, and I go maven install or maven verify. I end up with my local builds in my local M2 repository, yada, 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 right, under 100 snapshot, say. And then I switch to my v2 profile, and I see how I'm getting on. I go maven install. I'm going to effectively pollute my M2 repository. The 100 snapshot, was it built under the v1 build, or was it part of the v2 build? So maven version set was also part of the recipe for switching from v1 build to a v2 build. So it was effectively just spin through all the POMs and just change 100 snapshot It's a 200 snapshot, which means then if I'm doing a Maven install, they're all going to be there in my local repository, but they're not going to interfere with each other. I guess there's other ways of doing this. Like I know you can set up with Maven there to be more than one repository directory, so that would have been a different way to kind of namespace to keep them separate. But this worked fine, works really quickly. So this is all we needed to do. So this little bit of script here, effectively, as you can see, there's the command maven version set -d new version equals the new thing. Spin that across the entire code base, and that just updates it. So any subsequent Maven build is doing the necessary thing. So this script here, v2 prepare branch, is effectively the script that we would run if we want to go into starting to migrate the code for v2. Write the marker files, already mentioned that one, and then run this command, and then any build I do thereafter effectively is going to be bringing up all the the v2 code, is going to bring up any new dependencies that are defined that in that profile, and it's going to make sure whatever I build doesn't interfere with any v1 builds. There's also some stuff about CI and stuff which we'll come on to later. Okay, so that's, I think, is that my last bit about? Oh no, a bit more. So building and packaging, we use Docker, as everybody does, of course, and so we want to, we're moving from Java, don't let Josh Long hear this, we were on Java 8, so now we're on Java 11, we're still lagging, but we're on the path anyway. So, and of course, Spring Boot has its own way of building Docker images, so we want to leverage that, which we were doing with the Spring Boot Maven plugin, and still a bit of legacy with Jib, rather than the default. That's also on the to-do list, but you can't eat the elephant in one go. If I can spit out a Docker image, then that was good enough, and we use a slight, that's the way we went about doing that. So this is again a little bit of the v2 profile. You can see that we had a legacy way of building a Docker image on v1, and this was the way we ended up building it on v2. Okay, so that's the Maven bit. I'm going to do a demo, but I want to talk about this first before I get there. Git work trees. So I'm always quite amazed. I don't know, actually, let me put hands up. If everyone puts their hand up, I'm going to feel okay. Who's used Git work trees? 1, 2, I would say about 5%. Okay, so that's not many. So hopefully it's going to be useful. Really useful technique and really, 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 really easy to use. Okay, so if you go git clone, then of course what you end up with is in a directory, you end up with a .git subdirectory. That's where the entire repository is. And of course you've also got checked out whatever branch it is, main or master or whatever is the default, right? So effectively that git clone does two different things. It clones the repo and it checks out into a directory. So a work tree is the second of those things. This is why we don't really sort of perhaps often realize there's two different things going on there. But you might have heard of a bare checkout. So a bare checkout is what you have happening on a CI build, and that's just the kind of the cloning of the .git directory of the history without there actually being any kind of physical files as a checkout. So these are decoupled from each other. And what that means is you can do a git clone, and then you can have multiple different directories on your computer, all checked out at a different branch, which is kind of useful for what we want to do. Because we want to, here's the next slide, I suppose. This is how easy it is. So our default branch is called prod for reasons. So if I've checked out the regular git clone, I've got my prod branch, which is where we do production fixes. But if I want to be doing my migration work, create a branch v1, same point as prod, create a branch v2, starting with the same point as prod, and then git work tree add. So you can see I'm just kind of going up one and across to create a peer directory alongside. And we're just saying, here's the directory, and this is what I want to be checked out. Here's the SHA ID, really. It's a commit-ish thing. It could be a tag, or it could be anything you want. But of course, what normally would be a branch. So that's really nice. And this is different from having two clones. You might think, why don't I just create two clones? The point is that the two work trees, v1 and v2, are linked back to the original clone, in this case in prod. So if I want to share information between the two branches, I don't have to push up to some pipeline or some repo, and then maybe there's a pipeline that kicks off. I don't really care about it. Effectively, it's all happening locally. All right. So a really useful trick. I'm sure you do this, you're working on some new feature, but then there's some bug fix that comes in you need to look at. Rather than have to sort of, check out and go to that wherever you need to go to, just sort of create a new work tree. Because I don't know if, what I find with IntelliJ is that it will cache stuff, right? And so it knows the status, and then so you have multiple instances of IntelliJ, and then you're not forever there refreshing. When the tool loses track and its internal caches, and you've got that sequence of bits of voodoo you have to do, to kind of eventually get to invalidate caches. And the one after that is reinstall IntelliJ, that whole sequence, right? So anything we can do to basically not have to sort of, restart IntelliJ, just leave that instance of IntelliJ pointing at your current work tree and have different work trees. And it works nicely because, of course, all of our computers are massively powerful. There's no problem with running multiple instances. So even if this is the only thing you pick up from this, it's really, really useful, and I'll be happy with that. Hopefully there'll be a few more pieces as well. But there we go. So I drew this picture that only I understood in the team, but I'm going to have a go at seeing if I can explain it to you as well, and maybe it'll make sense. So if we start at the top, we've got the prod branch, and I want to do some work, so I would create a branch for V1, stup2, that's the Istashio Upgrade 2 project, and I'd actually create another branch, which would be stup2 123-V2, which that's the bottom line, the bottom tram line. So the first thing that I would do, and I did this literally hundreds of times over the 2 years, is in the V2 branch, run that script, V2 prepare branch. That's the one that's going to drop the POM file, the marker files, to switch to V2 marker, and it's going to do the Maven version set. So that's my V2 context. If I run an IntelliJ pointing at that directory, it's seeing the V2 world, effectively. Whereas if I point IntelliJ at my V1 directory, I'm still on the original profile, and I'm seeing things from a V1 perspective. And then I make some changes. So I basically move stuff to source main Java V1 back to source main Java. And then I want to see that down in the V2 to see if it's compatible. So I can run a script here, which is just going to basically do a git merge from V1 to V2. And we'll see what happens. No pushing needed. I'm just basically running git merge, which is I created a little script here, V2 merge from V1, but behind the scenes it was just really running git merge. And then sometimes you kind of say, oh, that's fine, there's a little fix. You make the fix in V2 and you need to move it back into V1 because you're trying to make sure that the code is compatible on both sides. Now, here's where you could make a mistake. See how good you are on your Git knowledge here. If I were to do a merge, having made a change here on V2, and just did a merge into V1, then that would be a mistake. You could make a pop quiz. But the reason why is because this here is part of the history. Right? I don't want that commit, because then that would kind of make the V1 branch the same as V2. So what I need to do instead is a cherry pick. So I wrote a little script that effectively figures out what has been done here since the last merge across, find the common ancestor and merge it across. So that was the pattern effectively. If it makes sense. So I can either be making changes either on V1 or V2, and I have a means to effectively to share it without having to do a push up to a repo. And eventually I get to the point where both my V1 and my V2 builds are fine. I've kind of moved my code from source main Java V1 back into source main Java. When I looked at it from a V2 perspective, it also works there. And I'm basically done. I've migrated one of my modules. Okay, at which point I can then revert if I wanted to. But actually I tend to not to. I just tend to just merge this in. And then we kind of do a rebase. We take start from this point and on it goes again. Bosh, bosh, bosh. Okay, so this is... That's the plan there. So the key point on this is merging and cherry picking, but on different work trees, so we don't confuse IntelliJ basically. Okay. And then this wasn't available, or I didn't know about it, but I was at a conference in May, I think, and there was a session on this, so you can go Googling. Open Rewrite is basically an SDK, open source. There's a company behind it, so I suppose there may be some elements of commercial stuff. But anyway, the idea of Open Rewrite are scripts that effectively automate migrations. And so, for example, if I wanted, and some of you might have this, I suppose, if I want to upgrade a project from Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3, then somebody will have already written the migration that effectively allows me to do that. So I think that this is like an aggregate recipe, I think there's like 160 something sub changes here. But the idea of Open Rewrite is that for vendors or for open source projects who are effectively creating new versions, like Spring, I suppose, that they would not only deliver, here's the new fabulous stuff, but wherever there's a breaking change, they could also deliver an Open Rewrite recipe, making us as the consumers our lives easier. So that's kind of the vision. But for the moment, it's like a community thing, and people, I think the rewrite guys are writing some of these things themselves. So again, if you've not come across Open Rewrite, worth checking it out. You can write your own recipes. There's 3 different ways of writing these recipes. The easy one is really easy, and the complicated one, I'm still going up the learning curve myself on how to do that. But it's like an AST with knobs on. So anyway, okay, so time for a demo. So we talked about Maven profiles, we talked about Git work trees, and I'll give you a little demo of Open Rewrite as well. So my application is, so what I've done, this is a Causeway application. I'm going to move it from V2 to V3. Causeway V2 is on Spring Boot 2, and Causeway V3 is a Spring Boot 3. This thing is running. If it's a pet clinic. We have too many pet clinics today. This is basically the tutorial application for the framework. The thing I just want to point out is that, so if I go looking in the About page, then Spring Boot dash, it's 2. So this is legacy already, instant legacy software. So if I go to my V3 branch, actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start this off and then keep talking. I'm going to run a switch branch. We'll come back to that one. But if I do a git work tree, can't type, list, then you can see that this directory here is my V2 branch, and then V3 is for my upgrade to V3. You can see they're both at the same SHA ID. I suppose everyone has their own favorite Git clients. I like to use SourceTree. So SourceTree works well with Git work trees. You can basically point it at both, and it will show you what's there. I've got V1 main and V3. I did buy myself a copy of Git Kraken, which is also very nice. And I was dismayed to find it doesn't support Git work trees. So I raised a ticket immediately, and I think they're working on it. So hopefully that will land. But anyway, that's a thing just to be aware of. So so let's have a look at this switch branch. So this is kind of similar to the prepare script I was talking about before. It's running Maven rewrite run. So there's that block of XML you saw is part of my POM. So effectively, we can say to Open Rewrite, convert this application, run a bunch of recipes. And then we have Maven versions update parent, moving to, in this case, 3.whatever. Doing that for both the parent I'm referencing, which is Causeway, and then the application, and then this one here is just dropping the file. So it's the same set of techniques. With the Stashio, I was going from V1 to V2. With this demo, I'm demoing going from V2 to Spring Boot V3 and Causeway V3, but it's the same thing. Okay, so in the meantime, that's finished. So if I have a look at SourceTree, hopefully, yeah, we can see a bunch of stuff that's been generated. Most of this stuff is Open Rewrite. You can see all those Java X, Java 11 things gone up to Java 17 and Jakarta. So that was Open Rewrite that did all that effectively in a nice automated fashion. And a few other bits and pieces as well, like this one. So I guess that's a change somewhere along the line. So it's not just doing changes to the Java code, it changes other stuff as well. So there we go. So that's fabulous. So I've got this instance of IntelliJ was pointing at the main. So if I remember, I didn't mess up. I've got a V3 instance, which I only want to start now, so it's pointing at my V3, my newly converted V3 branch. And then, if I remember where I can run it from, I'm going to run it up, and hopefully we're going to see that it's all there. But actually, what I'll just do is to compare. Going back to the profiles piece, let's have a look. So you can see that this V2 original code, these are both in blue because there is no marker file, and so the POM here is going to activate the one profile, and then if I look at the v3 instance, then we can hopefully see. Look at that. Why is that? Why is that like that? Maybe I need to refresh. This is like good demo, Dan. Good demo. Well, let's have a look at the code anyway. I might just need to refresh. I think I'm falling by my own problem here, really. But on localhost 8080, this is now the same application converted, and on the about, hopefully I will see a v3.310. That was the Maven version set. And then in terms of just proving we've got the actual new dependencies, Spring Boot dash, it should be 3 something. So there we are. But I think actually what I need to do, see that says that's blue. That's wrong. It should be the v3. If I do a Maven reload, this is the caching I'm talking about. If it doesn't do it, I'm not going to sweat about it. But this is exactly the issue that one has. Okay. Anyway, we'll see if that kicks into life. Okay, so that's demo number 1. So Maven profiles, Git work trees go together, open rewrite, a bit of extra candy floss. Next up, so Estachio, which we started talking about, is a modular monolith, the trendy thing. I wrote a book a number of years ago, and I mentioned this product Structure 101, which is a Dublin or Irish-based thing. I think they're south of Dublin somewhere, and they were good enough to give me a copy of Structure 101. Even if I didn't get a free copy, I would say it's worth checking out. So this is a thing that lets us see the structure of our code. It's just painting a picture. We can trust it because it's a reflection of the code. I went back and I found this picture from 7 years ago where you can see that we've got one big Maven module and we've got a little bit of cyclic dependency there, so not so clever. So before we started working on this migration, we sorted out those issues and we made it much more fine-grained as well. So this is effectively what we got to when we started the migration. This is all still just one big Maven module. And you could use modulith to kind of, an arc unit and those types of things, more on that later, to sort of make sure that you've got no cyclic dependencies. But actually the way that we went is we just rely upon Maven modules instead, because effectively the code won't compile. In fact, you can't even get IntelliJ to make the change if you don't have this. So this is actually what the code looks like now. I actually have it in another instance of Estachio. So this is the very, very much, just to give you a feel for it really. Here's all the incoming modules. Here's all the outgoing modules. And here's all there's shared kernel, the sort of stuff that's common to them both. It's a big enough application. I don't know, there's 160 or something modules. This is what we mean by a modular monolith. So that works pretty well. And then just to put that slide up again. Just remind you, effectively, we are migrating the code from source main Java v1 into source main Java times 160. Okay, effectively, this was just one of all of those Maven modules. Okay. But that's kind of important because really if you've got a project that's going to last for 2 years, you need to keep the faith. You need, ultimately, there's some political cover, right? Effectively, we're doing some technical stuff that the business don't know about or whatever. The IT manager knows. He has to present to the board and just say, it's going fine, So we found a Maven plugin that will draw a nice picture of the dependencies. And then this is literally, we just would get a marker and effectively just show where we're up to, and we just worked our way up the graph, and felt good. Some of these boxes are big and some of them are small, but we were able to demonstrate progress throughout the time, and that was good enough for us. Lightweight organization. We didn't over engineer it, as you can see, but it worked okay. And then just to maybe emphasize, I probably mentioned this already, but for us, every Maven module is exactly one Spring configuration. So you sort of see the symmetry. On the right-hand side, you can see that we've got some dependencies in Maven to the outgoing invoice for lease module and the outgoing contract to lease module, whatever they are. And on the right-hand side, at this side, we've got effectively the corresponding imports. So that was how it works. And the thing is, keep simple that way. You don't have to remember logical modules, physical modules. They're just modules. So that was the pattern. And another point to this is, so I was working on this maybe 70% of my time on this technical stuff. We brought in another company in who assisted a bit with this. But the other 2 or 3 people in the team were busy doing business stuff. And effectively, Dan will be doing the technical stuff and we'll figure this out and we'll get there. But in the meantime, we have to keep the car on the road, keep delivering the value. And the other guys in the team didn't know Spring Boot. They knew the ISIS framework and they knew the conventions, but for the changes that Causeway and Spring Boot introduced, that was new stuff. So we wanted to sort of feed that stuff in to sort of bring them up to speed as necessary, but not distract them too much because their main job was delivering business value. So this was sort of the other place to this, is we just eat the elephant slowly. And as we introduce some change, we can introduce it and show it to the team, and it's one new thing they need to remember. And they can feel that's fine, and it's not taking up too much of their bandwidth because they're mostly thinking about the business value that they're trying to deliver. And then also, of course, when we make a mistake, well, it's an easy thing to revert. So, I'm a big fan of doing things in as small a slice as you can. I think that's a good practice, whatever type of software development you do, really. Small steps all the way. Next point, dependency management. So I'm going to explain why we've got a picture of some grandparents here in a second, you'll see. So imagine we're back to 2 years ago and we're about to start this project. We've got this code base that's 12 years old, that's delivering value for the business, and it was 10 years old at that point, I suppose. And it's working, but it's got lots of technical debt in terms of dependencies and so forth. And we want to put Spring Boot and the new version of this Causeway framework underneath. So now if you write a Spring Boot application, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you inherit from the starter parent, right? So I've got to take my existing 10-year-old code base and I've got to go in and do some major brain surgery to say, I'm going to change the parent to something completely different. And it's perhaps not that is the problem. The problem is the grandparent, which is this. The parent of the starter parent is the Spring Boot dependencies. It's the curated list of all dependencies. So by effectively changing the parent of my root POM, I'm kind of bringing in a whole bunch of other stuff. It's like, well, that's just, in terms of making a small change, that's making a big change. So how to manage this, how to kind of lock down your dependencies, have some way of effectively capturing that. What we did is we used this approach. You use Maven dependency plugin. Okay, put it underneath a profile. I like to do that. That kind of modularizes it. This is a utility. I'll keep it away from the main build. So I can go -D, lockdown, and that will activate this profile. And then in the executions bit here, just say that's this over here. So all this is really doing is saying when I do a Maven dependency list, then capture the output and put it into a certain directory. And do that for tree as well. And so this command here effectively is capturing the actual current set of dependencies as both a list and as a tree. And then we write ourselves a little approval test. So who's used approval test? Just kind of get a flavor again. Oh, well, you've got a treat, really. Because for me, approval test is the best way to write tests. It's the most humane way of writing assertions. So there's a great library called Approvals, which is a Java library, and there's several other ways of doing this. There's somebody on YouTube, Emily Bach, I think her name is, and she's a big fan, and there's lots of good resources about this. So take the time to do this, but I'll give you a quick demo. So what this is doing effectively is it's going to compare the idea is a snapshot of what you know to be good, and then you make a change and you do it again, and then you look to see if there's a difference, right? If there's no difference, everything's worked fine, okay? Or sometimes there is a difference, but it's one you meant, and you say, that's fine, I approve the change, right? Because I've upgraded a dependency, I expect that to be a change, I run this lockdown, it says that's changed, and you say, bingo. But maybe there's some other change that you didn't see, some transitive dependency, and how it's like with Maven and stuff. So you want to really understand what's there. So let me show you what that means, because that might not have made any sense, I don't know. So what I need to do first is I need to what command do I run? Generate lockdown. Yeah. Typo. Generate lockdown. Okay, so this is running Maven lockdown. So we generate this. It's just running, as you see, dependency list, and it's going. The executions there are just going to make it cause these, create these files. So it's written some files. We go to IntelliJ, and if I remember where to go looking, it's in. I think is it this one, or is it the other one? Maven web app. It's actually the web app, not web app tests. So they go to have target. God, it's amazing. You go up here and then your brain just completely goes. Never mind. It's in there somewhere. I don't think it matters too much. What I'm going to do is run the test. So hopefully this will pass, and then I'm going to make it fail, and then you're going to understand what on earth I've been talking about. Okay, cool. Right. So that's kind of verified that the my lockdown, my values are good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to an earlier version of the frame of a dependency. I'm going to change two things here. I'm going to rerun the command that's going to run Maven dependency. That's going to create a new version of the actual dependencies, and they'll be different from what they were last time because I've just made some changes. Okay. So and now if I go back to my script, my test, hopefully this is where it all becomes a bit more obvious. Okay, cool. All right. So this is what approval testing looks like. There was the known snapshot of the dependencies as of 2.10, whatever. And then I made a change, and I kind of went back to an earlier version, 2.0.0. And as you'd expect, there are different dependencies. And this is what the approvals library does. Effectively, I'm running it for two different things. This is basically showing alphabetically all the changes. On the right-hand side is what's approved. Okay, I don't know if you can read this. It says list.approved. That's kind of what's snapshotted as known to be good. And on the left-hand side is list.received. That's what I've currently got now. So you can see there's differences. And if I expected them to be there, then I would say that's fine, and I'd approve it. So I do it that way, and then with the other one is the tree. So sometimes it's good to be able to analyze where it comes from. So that's what approval testing is, and it's very empathetic, really, for a human being to sort of see these, comparisons and then decide how it works. So that's the idea of that. Cool. All right. Other points. Parallel builds. So we're building two versions of the application. So what we did is we extended our CI pipeline. We use GitLab. So the first lines 2 and 3 were the old build using Java 8 and Docker push, whatever that command was. Lines 4 and 5 were the new build. You can see a snapshot of the pipeline that we were building these things side by side. And so whenever I push, I effectively ended up with two images. The old V1, that's what's been deployed, and the new version. And as we went through the 2 years, of course, the V2 version got bigger and bigger, and more menu items appeared as we migrated each of the modules. For the guys who weren't working on the migration, we had a little convention to say if you do a push and you say V1 only, then that suppressed the V2 build. So it was a little convenience for them because they didn't care, and that was fine. Also, while I was at it, we found a plugin called Timeline, which produces this kind of nice output to sort of see where the time is being spent. Now, Timeline is kind of broken now because it relies upon a feature of Chrome that's been removed, WebSQL. But I was at a conference and I found that there's a replacement or a better thing still. So again, maybe if you use this, if you haven't, it's great. You can get if you like distributed tracing, I'm a fan of a bit of distributed tracing. So you can do distributed tracing on your own builds. You just need to put that in as a build extension. And then run yourself up a Docker instance of Jaeger or one of the other tools. And then the Maven build is going to send telemetry to Jaeger listening on port, whatever it is. Okay. And then I run my Maven install, and I just put a system property there, and I'm going to get myself some tracing. And so, in true, here's one I did earlier style. I did it twice earlier on today. So this is a build took 2 minutes 46, and this was Maven install. And so this is what we can see in Jaeger. You can see that Maven install, building in serial for the various different modules that, this is where the time was taken. I can drill into each of these and I can see how long the compile and the test took and so forth. By the way, this is quite a good demonstration that it's, well, actually I'll come on to the next one and I'll say what I want to say. If we look at this other one here, this is the same command with a -T1C run in parallel, as many threads as you have cores, basically. And what we can see here, if I collapse it, is that the Maven, this module here, which has got some tests in it, is being run at the same time as the web app, or other way around really, I suppose. The web app, which is going to build the Docker image, is starting while we're running the tests for one of the other modules. So you can start to see the kind of parallelization, and therefore, of course, the time to do the build reduces. And then you say, well, I haven't done it with Pet Owner, a different module. Was it worth it? Well, how long were the tests? Well, they weren't really, so it wasn't really worth it. But you got that kind of those insights. Okay, I need to speed up a bit, Dan. Hurry up. Cool, so that's build. Parallel build, parallel deployments as well. So here's a snapshot of our Kubernetes sort of environment, and you can see that Wouter, one of our teammates, and he had deployed this build image, and then -v2, that's the v2 image, running side by side. We extended our pipelines, our Helm chart, to be able to deploy them both pointing at the same database, and you can kind of do side-by-side testing. Here's a screenshot of 2 login pages. Very interesting. Okay, so that's that platform. I'm going to speed up a bit more. So this is kind of like fairly conventional stuff, I suppose. The frameworks we were using, some of the signatures had changed. So what we did for the sort of technical services, we introduced facades. So here we have, for example, ECP background service. And in the V1, we have a variant of that to delegate to the actual ISIS background service. And then in V2, we have the same implementation. So this is just a very, very standard, I'm sure you've done this a million times, type of, what's it called, branch by abstraction. Okay. But in case you haven't come across this book, please read it. It's quite an old book now, but it was a classic in its day. And if you're put off by the word legacy, then don't. Mr. Feathers' definition, maybe it's Dr. Feathers. Anyway, legacy code is code without tests, which I think is a great definition because it's code you daren't touch, right? So if you haven't got this book, highly recommended. That pattern there is one of the many, many recipes. Well done. Okay, ArcUnit has been mentioning a few times in the conference. Spring Modulith uses it. I know Josh Long's presentation talked about it. So I probably don't need to talk about this too much. But we use ArcUnit also for sort of coding conventions. And so we can write these rules. They're actually really, really easy, and they're also really quick to run as well. So, for example, you saw on that previous slide deck, we were saying, don't use clock service, use ECP clock service, like an abstraction that sits on top. And so we wrote some tests that effectively reminded those of us in the team that weren't doing the migration, this is the rules. If you're writing new code, even if we've migrated old code, if new code, this is a way to make sure that new stuff should follow the rules. Okay, and lots of rules, as you can see, we ended up writing. Okay, and you can do some interesting things. For example, every object must have a corresponding builder, so we took the time to make our unit tests easier by enforcing the rule that every one of our entities would have a builder, so the unit tests were easier to read and understand how they were set up. So you can do lots of interesting things with ArcUnit, so if you've not had a chance to play around with it, it is definitely worth your while, I would say. I haven't got time to demo that. So to wrap up, it was important at some point to bring the business on board. We were going to go live at some point. We went live in June. And one of the things that Thijs, our IT manager, said was, exactly how much work was it? So I had a look, and I found a tool that was able to draw this picture. So you can see that in blue is the amount of code changes over the 2 years, getting on for 2 million changes, according to this. How did I generate that diagram, you ask? So if you go to this repo, you can download this thing, Docker Compose. You can import your Git repos, and then you can run queries like that. So it's got a proper database. So you can effectively do statistics on tables that call Git commits and so forth, and you can get great analytics from this. And there we are. So, and to finish off, actually this was just one of many migrations, and so this was the migration from ISIS v1 to v2. Next up is we're going to change the namespace to the new namespace of Causeway. Then we're going to go from v2 to v3, and then the one I'm dreading is the horrible secret. The framework uses JDO, which is the Betamax of the ORMs. But obviously the world is on JPA, so at some point we're going to have to move all of our ORM from data nucleus onto Eclipse Link or Hibernate, one of the two. To get along the way, we've done some of the work already, moving from JDOQL to Query DSL. So there we are. So I think that's me, and I'm just about out of time. I must say thanks to Eurocommercial for letting me present this. Open Circle was the other consultancy that assisted. And if you're wondering how a little team like with 3 or 4 people can build a big ERP, then it comes, for me, it's down to this framework. So indulge me while I just put up a few little quotes from our community. And I would very happy to talk about this as well if you're interested. But anyway, if you want the slides, you can get them from me. That's my LinkedIn. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was useful.